Welcome back. So during last lecture of public finance, we discussed how the budget making process. We discussed how it starts from the month of September. In September, the Ministry of Finance it sends some guidelines to the spending ministries, and by December they will cumulate this figure. They will send it back to Ministry of Finance. By February second week, Ministry of Finance cumulate this thing, and it is tabled in the Parliament on the last working day of the February. Then it is passed by. Then it is goes to the departmental standing committees. After their scrutiny, it comes back to the Lok Sabha, and then in the Lok Sabha, individual demand for grants are discussed. Then there comes an appropriation bill is introduced. Finally, appropriation bill is passed, and then the finance bill is passed. And we also discussed few constitutional articles related to budget. We discussed 110, 112, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Also, we discussed the difference between money bill and finance bill, public account fund and consolidated fund of India. So these small things we discussed. In today's lecture is one of the most relevant lecture from exam perspective. You can always expect at least one question, least one question from whatever is mentioned, whatever is written on this board. This is what the structure of the budget is. The structure of the budget means because the president has to put forward the budget or has to table the budget in the parliament as per article 1112 or the governor as per article 202. So the budget should be divided into this revenue and capital as per the constitution. There is one more division of budget as per planned and non-planned. We'll discuss this planned and non-planned in detail later on. But for now on, this planned non-planned distinction will be over by 2017. By the end of this 12th 5-year plan, this distinction will be vanished. But still we will discuss. So this budget, in case of budget, one hand is always fixed, and that hand is Government of India. Suppose I am Government of India. So this, whether the Government of India is getting some money or something is going outside from Consolidated Fund of India or from Government of India. So in this case, one entity is always fixed. In this case, second entity can be anything, but one entity I am. In this case also, one entity I am, it means Government of India. The second entity can be anybody, but one entity is fixed, and that entity is Government of India. So in case of budget, if I want to ask you this question, that Microsoft comes and invested $100 billion in India, that will come under the receipt part of the budget or that will go to the expenditure part of the budget? Amazon is coming and investing $100 billion in India. So the answer is nowhere, because Amazon is coming, a private entity is coming, investing somewhere in India. The Government of India is nowhere involved. Of course, the tax being paid, that is an indirect consequence. So tax paid by Amazon will go into the receipt part, and that will mean direct taxes as well as indirect taxes. But that is what direct investment of Amazon. If an FDI comes and invests something in India, that will not be directly reflected in the budget, because in case of budget, one entity is fixed and that entity is Government of India. So budget can be divided into two things. First one is receipts, the money being collected by the government, and the second thing is the expenditure part of the government. Again, the receipt is also divided into two, the revenue as well as the capital. Similarly, the expenditure is also divided into revenue as well as the capital. First, I want to discuss some small things, and then I will give you 2-3 minutes to overview this particular budget structure. So capital is always related to change in asset or liability. Whenever there will be any change in asset or liability, that entity will be regarded as capital, and whatever the remaining things, that will come under this revenue. So if there is any change in asset or liability, that will come under capital. All other things will go to revenue. Similarly, if suppose you have given a loan, I am Government of India, I gave a loan to somebody. So there will be a principal amount over which there will be some interest. So on that principal amount only I am getting this interest. So it means this principal amount is my asset. So that principal amount is always a component of capital and the interest is always a part of the revenue. If government is getting the interest, that will come under revenue receipt. If the government has to pay some interest, that will go into revenue expenditure. Here we have interest payment, here we have interest received, but interest always goes to, interest is a part of revenue and principal amount is a part of capital, because capital is related to asset or liability. On that principal only you are getting some interest. That is why this will be your asset and this will be what you are getting when you are giving a loan. So the principal amount of the loan will be a part of capital, but the interest on that capital will be a part of revenue. So the budget is divided into receipt, expenditure, again subdivided into revenue and capital. Now I am giving you 2 minutes to just you can put your screen on hold for 2 minutes. So in case of revenue receipts, so revenue receipts are further divided into tax revenue and non-tax revenue. It means the government is getting some money by using some taxes, or the government is getting some money by some non-tax revenue. So under this tax revenue we can have two types of taxes. The basics of direct and indirect tax we have already covered. So under direct tax we have corporate income tax and we also have private income tax, plus of course a number of taxes are there, but these are the basic two taxes, CIT and PIT. Then in case of indirect taxes also we have excise duty, then we have service tax, and then we have custom. You have to remember these taxes in this order only, because as per budget 2016 and 17, this is what the expected revenue of the government. So first will be excise. Why excise is above service? Just how you can cram it in, because we have Make in India, and through Make in India we are domestically producing some goods, and if there is domestic production of goods, these producers have to pay some tax, and that tax is known as excise duty. So this excise duty, of course excise also includes VAT. So excise duty will be above. Then we have service tax, because last year government increased service tax, so service is the second priority, and then we have the custom duty. So this is what the decreasing order. Then we have the non-tax revenue. So under this non-tax revenue, the majority of the money government is getting through the profits of PSUs. We have so many PSUs. We have ONGC, we have Coal India Limited, we have Maharatna, Navratna, Miniratna, all this classification is there. So more than 250 PSUs we have, or CPSEs we have, Central Public Sector Enterprises. So these enterprises, they are in net profit. Earlier they were in loss, but after this liberalization and increasing the independence, the decision making power by classifying these PSUs into Maharatna, Navratna, Miniratna, now they are profit making. So profit of PSUs. So under this PSUs, can you tell me which PSU is giving maximum profit to government? Whether it is Maharatnas, or can you name any PSUs? So the answer is RBI. It's a very strange thing, but yeah, RBI every year, because RBI charges repo rate. So banks are paying some money to RBI. So every year RBI is roughly giving 60,000 crore to the government of India. So profit of PSUs. Then we have profit of economic services. So government may be giving some economic services to the citizens. So that will also consider under the non-tax revenue receipt. Then we have grants. Suppose USA government gave us some grants. So whatever grants given to the central government, that will come under non-tax revenue receipt. Then we have the gifts. For example, Modi visited USA and Barack Obama gave some gifts. So that will come under this thing. Then you have donations. Of course, somebody donated Pradhan Mantri Relief Fund, that fund and all. So that will also come under this non-tax revenue receipts. Then we have the license fees. Then you have fines. Suppose you want to take a driving license, you have to pay some fees, that is known as license fees. Then you have fines. Then also you have interest received. Suppose Government of India gave a loan to somebody A. So in return A has to pay some interest. So that interest will come under non-tax revenue receipt. And why it comes under revenue? Because we discussed interest is always a part of revenue. So that is why interest received will come under non-tax revenue receipt. So this is what the revenue receipts part. After this revenue receipts part, next one we have is capital. And capital is if there is any change in asset or liability, that will come under this capital. So this capital will be classified into asset and liability. So under this asset, by decreasing your asset, you can get some money. This is what the receipt part is. And in this example, I am Government of India. So I am getting something, but I have to decrease my asset. How I can do it? First one is disinvestment. So what is disinvestment? Disinvestment is nothing but diluting the ownership of the government from PSUs. Suppose this is ONGC and Government of India is having some 80% of the stake in ONGC. So this part belongs to private sector, maybe individual entities, you and me. Suppose I have some shares of ONGC. So if government now decides to dilute 5 more percent of the ownership of ONGC, so this 5% will be available to the general public. They will purchase the shares of ONGC and in return they will pay something to the owner of the company, and in this case the owner of the company is Government of India. So disinvestment is nothing but diluting the ownership by the government under this public sector entities or central public sector enterprises. So this is what the disinvestment is. Next you have is sale of assets. So by selling the assets also I can get some money. Suppose I have 100 acre of land and under railways. So I can sell this 100 acre of land and I can get some money, but this 100 acre was my asset. So I have decreased my asset, but this financial year I am getting some money. So by sale of assets also I can get some money. That is why all this is part of receipts. But because I am selling my assets and assets should come under capital, so it is a part of capital only. So sale of assets also capital. Then I have recovery of loan. Suppose the Government of India gave you some loan, maybe in 2010, and in 2016-17 I have taken that loan back. So when I will take this loan back, I will not get any interest in future because I have taken that principal amount. So of course I am getting some money that will come under the receipt part, but I have decreased or I have removed my asset. That principal was the asset. When I gave you the loan, that principal amount was the asset. If I will recover that principal amount from tomorrow, you will not pay me any interest. So by recovery of loan also you can decrease the asset. But we also discussed how to start a new company. In that new company, first one is your own money, then you can take a loan and this loan is known as debt, and third way is diluting the ownership. So all these ways are non-debt capital receipts because you are not borrowing from anybody. Just by diluting your own assets you are getting some money, but you are not borrowing from anybody. So that is why this is also known as non-debt capital receipts. But under this second component, where by increasing your liability, how you can increase your liability? By taking a debt. It means by taking a loan. So you can borrow. So if you will borrow something, Government of India, I borrowed 100 crore rupees from somebody. So of course I am getting some money in 2016-17, but in future I have to repay it. It means I have increased my liability. So from which all parts I can borrow? I can borrow from within India, I can borrow from outside India. Within India also I can borrow from financial institutions like banks. From these financial institutions I can borrow, or maybe I can borrow from general public. I can issue Kisan Vikas Patra, National Saving Certificate. All these schemes is a type of borrowing only. So this general public also, from general public also I can borrow, or maybe I can take a loan from RBI. Now we have stopped it because monetized deficit has become zero. We'll discuss it later on. But yeah, RBI is also one of the options. Then we have external options. From outside India also Government of India can borrow, because if you have to borrow from outside India, again you have to put some mortgage, some collateral. So if you are borrowing from outside India, the mortgage or collateral is consolidated fund of India. So union government can borrow because union government is the ultimate owner of consolidated fund of India. But suppose there is some state, suppose Gujarat or Bihar or UP wants to borrow from some other country, Japan. But if you want to borrow from outside India, the mortgage is CFI, and CFI is being maintained by central government. It means state government cannot borrow from outside India unless and until they take a permission from union government. And this is what we have, article 293, borrowings of the state government, and article 292 is borrowings of the union government from outside India. So states cannot borrow from outside India unless and until they take a permission from union government. But here you can borrow because it is the union government. So union government can borrow. And this borrowing can also be of two types. First one is bilateral. Bilateral means one country has given you a loan. China gave you a loan. Japan gave you a loan. So this is known as bilateral. And then you have multilateral. Multilateral means a group of countries. A group of countries means, suppose whether it is a international institution being created by a group of countries. For example, we have Asian Development Bank. For example, we have IMF, World Banks. All these are regarded as multilateral institutions because they are being set up by a group of countries. So that will come under multilateral. If from one country you are borrowing, that will come under bilateral. So this is what the receipts part of the budget. Now we will discuss the expenditure part of the budget. I have to do some expenditure. Again, it is divided into revenue and capital. So under this revenue expenditure, I can have interest payment. Suppose I am Government of India and I borrowed 50 crore rupees in 2000 for 20 years. So till 2020, I have to pay interest every year, and in 2020, I have to return the principal amount. So that interest payment has accrued over these years. In 2005 also I borrowed for 20 years. In 2010 also I borrowed for 20 years. In 2015 also I borrowed for 20 years. So in 2016 I have to pay interest for the money which I have borrowed in 2000 as well as 2005 as well as 2010 as well as 2015. So there is an accrued interest over the years, and that I have to pay, and that is why the interest payment every year is 5 lakh crore. The budget outlay is only 19.7 lakh crore. Roughly we can say 20 lakh crore. So every year government do the planning of 20 lakh crore. Out of this 20 lakh crore, 5 lakh crore goes only to the interest payment, because the past government, they borrowed some money and now the present government has to repay the interest. So this interest payment is 5 lakh crores. The next we have subsidies. So these subsidies are only of the union government. These subsidies are not of state government. Electricity subsidy will not be a part of this. Water subsidy will not be a part of this, because electricity and water, they comes under state list. Just like in Delhi, Arvind Kejriwal government gave subsidy on electricity or on water. So all these subsidies are not a part of this. Union government gives subsidy for food, just like in case of National Food Security Act, Union government is giving a subsidy of 1.25 lakh crores. More than 1 lakh crore is the subsidy. Then the Union government also gives subsidies for fertilizer. Union government also gives subsidy for LPG. Union government also gives subsidy for seeds. So all these are the subsidies given by Union government. So this is what the subsidy, and the value is 2.5 lakh. We'll discuss values later on. Then defense. In case of defense also, there can be two types of expenditure. One is, it's like for the salaries and for all other day-to-day functions. And the second one is, suppose India decided to purchase 10 howitzer from USA, or India decided to purchase some Rafale deal is there from France. So all these are assets. They are not revenue. So if you are purchasing an asset, so that should come under here. Expenditure, this purchase of assets. So that component should not come under this revenue part, but that should come under this purchase of assets. So this 1.6 is a part of revenue and this 0.85 is a part of capital expenditure. Then we have pension. So pension is 1.2 lakh crores. Different pensions. Before 2004 we had mandatory pension scheme that has been replaced by NPS, new pension scheme, under which nobody is getting the mandatory pension except the defense forces. Under this NPS, some of the money will be given by government and you also have to contribute. For example, 12% of the basic, 12% of the basic, that will be the component of NPS. Then we have grants to the states. Union government gives some grants to the states. Grants means it is not loan. State governments are not going to return it. But suppose union government gives some grants to states, maybe under engineering, and state government with these grants has created a water harvesting plant. But this water harvesting plant is an asset. It is not a part of revenue. So if state governments are getting the money under this revenue expenditure, but the end use they are doing it is for creating the assets or purchasing the assets. So it means some component of these grants to states should come under this purchase of asset or expenditure on infrastructure. So some component of this, just like some component of defense, should come under this capital expenditure part. So we'll discuss about this later on. Next revenue expenditure is police. But police is a state subject, then how come the union government is doing the expenditure on police? This police is paramilitary forces, CISF, ITBP, Assam Rifles. So all these are paramilitary forces. So expenditure on police is a part of revenue expenditure. Then we have the general services. So the general services provided by the government, and then we have the economic services, then we have the social services, external affairs expenditure, health and all. So all these are part of revenue expenditure. Then we have the postal deficit. Department of Post is in loss of 8,000 crore. Then we have NDRF, National Disaster Response Fund, which is being maintained by the union government. So every year union government provides some funds to NDRF. Then we have next one is union territory. Suppose Delhi is there, Puducherry is there. So union government has to give some amount of money to these union territories or on the expenditure of union territories. So that will be a part of revenue expenditure. And then we have grants to foreign countries. Suppose Delhi decided to give $1 billion grants to Bangladesh or maybe Mongolia. That will be reflected under this revenue expenditure. So all these things comes under part of revenue expenditure. Then after revenue, we'll discuss the capital expenditure. Again, just like we have capital receipts, similarly, capital expenditure will be divided into asset and liability. If you are doing some expenditure, your assets are going to increase. How to increase? Either I will do the expenditure on infrastructure. I am doing the expenditure and I have created a plant, a power plant I have built. So it means I have created some asset. Second way, providing new loans. Suppose I gave a new loan to some other entity. I'm Government of India. I gave a loan to Maharashtra government. So it means that loan, that principal amount is going to give me some interest. So it means I have created an asset. So by increasing the asset also. Then third one is the purchase of assets. Here the railway land that I have, that I sold, 100 acre of land that I sold, suppose I purchase it back. So when I am purchasing the land, I have to pay some price. So of course I am doing the expenditure, but I am increasing my assets. So by purchase of assets, I am increasing my assets. That can be also part of capital expenditure. Similarly, if I am doing the expenditure, I can decrease my liability. How I can decrease my liability? Suppose I have taken a loan. If I will repay that amount of loan, so now onwards I don't have to pay any interest over it. So it means I have decreased my liability. I am doing some expenditure. If I will repay the loan which I have taken, if I will repay the loan, I don't have to pay any future interest. It means I have decreased my liability. So the repayment of loan is also a part of capital expenditure. So again I am giving you 1 minute to go through this structure of budget, because you can always expect one question from this diagram. So after this basic structure of the budget, you have to cram few figures for budget 2016 and 17. Some rough values you have to cram. So the total outlay of the budget will be 19.7, or we can cram as 20 lakh crores. And what is the value of the total GDP of India is $2.1 trillion. 2.1 trillion means it equals to, if I will say $65 per home, so it is 135 lakh crores. So out of the total GDP of 135 lakh crores, Union government is doing and planning of 20 lakh crores. So it means almost 15% only. So under this revenue receipts, first of all, so the total receipts will be equal to the total expenditure. So here also it will be 19.7 lakh crores. The value is different. The value is same. Sorry. So in case of revenue receipts, it will be of 13.7 lakh crores. So the money through tax and non-tax being collected by the government is 13.7 lakh crore. So the rest of the money Union government has to borrow, either borrow or sell the assets. Only two options are there. So under this revenue, 13.7 is there. So the tax revenue is more than 10. The direct tax, under direct tax, corporate income tax is roughly 5. Personal income tax is 3.5. Excise duty is 3.5. Service 2.3 and custom is 2.3. Then in exams, it has already been asked the decreasing order of these taxes. So the next type of question that you can expect is, what is the percentage of CIT in the total tax collected by Union government? So the total tax collected is 5 plus 3.5 plus 3.2, 2 and 2.3. Roughly it will be 15 lakh crores, more than 14. Some other taxes are also there. But here I am saying it is 10. How it is possible? That individually this figure comes to 15 lakh crore, the tax being collected. But here I am saying the tax revenue receipt of the government is only 10 lakh crores. So why it is different? It is different because some amount of money Union government has to give to the states on the recommendations of the Finance Commission. So for now on, forget about this thing. We'll discuss this finance under the chapter of Finance Commissions or Central Sponsored Scheme. So in either of these two chapters, we'll discuss what is this thing. But on the recommendations of the Finance Commission, some amount of money every year Union government has to give to the state governments. Roughly its value is 5.2 lakh crores. So although the tax collection is 15 lakh crores, but the tax revenue given by the government, Union government, is only 10 lakh crores. You have to roughly cram the value of CIT, just like 5 lakh crore. So if in the question it comes, what is the percentage of CIT in the total tax collected by Union government? And they will give you a range, first 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60. So the answer is 30 to 40%, because it is roughly 5 lakh crores and total is 14 point something or 15 lakh crores. Then we have the non-tax revenue. So under this non-tax revenue, the maximum is profit of PSUs, and under PSUs also it is from the RBI. Then we have the interest received, which we already discussed. This disinvestment, the target is 56.5 thousand crore. Last year, it means 2015-16, the target was 69,000 crore. And then the total capital receipts is 6 lakh crores, out of which the borrowing is 5.2 lakh crores. So in 1 year, we are borrowing 5.2 lakh crores. And from this, the maximum borrowing is done through financial institutions. Similarly, in case of revenue expenditure, the interest payment is 5 lakh crore. Can you make a relationship here? Every year you are borrowing 5.2 lakh crores, but you are forced to pay an interest of 5 lakh crore. So the present government, the present Modi government is borrowing 5.2 but is forced to pay interest payment of 5 lakh crore. So that the borrowing for which you are paying the interest might have borrowed in 2000, 2005, 2010 or maybe 90s. So it is the liability of the past government which you have to fulfill. So this is a part of deficit also, we'll discuss later on. Then the next one is subsidies. We discussed 2.5 lakh crore. All these figures, some rough figures you have to cram. Then in case of capital, you don't have to cram any figure. So once this basic is clear, plus few values that you are able to cram, next what we are going to discuss is the type of deficits that we have. So we have 6 types of deficits. So the first type of deficit is budget deficit. The second deficit is revenue deficit. The third one is effective revenue deficit. Fourth one is fiscal deficit. Fifth one is primary deficit, and sixth one is monetized deficit. So first we'll cover what is budget deficit. Actually at present there is no concept like budget deficit that exists in India. This was the concept in 1997, but now this budget deficit concept has been abolished. Earlier what was the scenario? The scenario was if there was a mismatch, if there was some mismatch between the total expenditure and the total receipts. So the mismatch was being fulfilled by issuing a special type of security, a special type of bills. They were being issued. In securities chapter we will discuss what is ad hoc treasury bill, but a special type of T-bill was being issued by the government to equalize the mismatch between the expenditure and the receipts. So now we have the borrowing part. Earlier that borrowing was being replaced by ad hoc treasury bill. So whatever was the difference, the government was issuing the ad hoc treasury bills. But now this ad hoc treasury bill concept has been abolished on the recommendations of Chakrabarti committee, and now we started fiscal deficit. So at present the value of budget deficit in India is always 0 after 1997, and in 1997 only the ad hoc treasury bill was abolished. Next, revenue deficit. You have to understand the basic of revenue deficit. Suppose when I am saying that the total receipts is equal to the total expenditure, I am saying receipts equal to expenditure, receipts having 2 components, expenditure having 2 components. First one is we have revenue, here we have capital, again revenue and capital. If I am saying that this equals to this, and revenue deficit means this is more than this first, second, third and fourth. I am saying this equals to this. Suppose the value is 10 and 10. So this is 10 and this is 10. Out of this 10, I am saying this is more than this. So suppose this is 6, this is 4. 4 plus x equals to 10. It means this capital will be 6 and this capital will be 4. Now, if revenue equals to expenditure and there is any deficit, it means this is more than this. Can I say capital receipts will be more than capital expenditure? If 6 is more than 4 and because the addition is same 10 and 10, I can simply say that capital receipt is more than the capital expenditure. Here also it is visible, 6 is more than 4. So when capital receipt is more, it means what? Net of this is more. So net of this is more is what? It means either my net assets are decreasing. Net means this minus this. So either my net assets are decreasing or my net liability is increasing. So in this case, the value of revenue deficit equals to 2. 6 minus 4, the value is 2 only. So revenue deficit causes or leads to net decrease in assets or net increase in liability. Both are worst. If I am decreasing my assets or I am increasing my liability, so both are worst. So that is why revenue deficit is regarded as worst type of deficit for any economy. All these commissions, committees and all, they are suggesting the revenue deficit in the economy should be 0. The revenue deficit should be 0. But the government is not able to do it. Why government is not able to do it? Because either government has to decrease this part or you have to increase this part. It means either make 6 as 5.5 or make 4 as 4.5. That is the only way through which you can decrease the revenue deficit. But if the government is not able to do it, they started playing with the figures. And in 2010, they came up with the new concept of effective revenue deficit. And what they said that some part of this grants to states is being utilized by states in the form of capital expenditure. That we discussed MG Narega. If union government is giving some grants under MG Narega and these states are for either purchasing some assets or creating some infrastructure, so what the union government is saying, that component should be counted under capital expenditure and not under revenue expenditure. So what they have done is, they have decreased its value or statistical value from 6 to 5.5. And when they have decreased this value, so the effective revenue deficit became 1.5. Ho gaya value decrease. Very simple, not a problem. But this is just a statistical thing. On ground, nothing has changed. No reforms has been taken by the government to decrease this revenue expenditure or to increase this revenue receipts. The tax to GDP ratio of India is one of the lowest in G20 countries because there are no reforms, major reforms taken by the government. So the government is not increasing it, not decreasing it, but playing statistical games. That is why all these commissions and committees, the 14th Finance Commission said, remove the concept of effective revenue deficits. So this is what we have, effective revenue deficit. Then we have fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is nothing but, it is the borrowing. Whatever the difference between expenditure and receipts except borrowing is known as fiscal deficit. Or we can say fiscal deficit is nothing but the total borrowings of the union government. And the borrowings is 5.2 lakh crores we discussed, and the total GDP is 135 lakh crores. So the percentage is, we can say 3 to 4%. So the target for next year is 3.5%. It means 2016-17 target is 3.5%, and the last year we achieved 3.8%. So this is what we have, the fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit is nothing but the total borrowings of the union government. Then we have the primary deficit. I told you one thing, that relate this interest payment with this borrowings. The present government is forced to borrow 5.2 lakh crores because you have to pay this 5 lakh crore as the interest payment. So if you actually want to see the report card of present government, you have to remove the effect of this interest payment. So ideally the government is just borrowing 20,000 crore because this one is the forced borrowing, because some previous government borrowed and now you have to fulfill your obligations. So that if you remove this interest payment from fiscal deficit, what you get is known as primary deficit. So primary deficit gives the actual report card of the present government. Then we have at last type of deficit. Last deficit that we have is known as monetized deficit. So this monetized deficit again has been abolished just like budget deficit. Monetized deficit is nothing but the borrowings of union government from RBI. But now government has stopped any borrowings from RBI. Now RBI borrows from the market and give back to union government, but directly RBI does not lend to government of India. This is also mentioned in FRBMA Act. We'll discuss this FRBMA under reforms section. So this is what the basic structure of the budget of union government as well as the types of deficits. Then in future classes we'll discuss some of the classification, revenue, capital, plan, non-plan, development, non-development and all this small issues. Thank you.